All right, are we live?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
I always have to ask because I don't know whether we are live or not. So anyway, very, very excited to be with you guys on this Thursday, and we got an interesting topic for you. So, by the way, you're gonna be, we're gonna be when are we gonna? I can't talk anymore. When are we going to release the video with Lior?
Maybe next week. I think next week. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
guys.
yeah.
Next week, be on the lookout for an interview we conducted with a financial guy. He's the president and CEO of the Wealth Management
Wealth Research Group.
Wealth Research Group.
Yeah.
So very insightful. So we'll give you a heads up anyway. So today's topic, very, 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 very interesting in my perspective. Whoever thought
that China and Australia would get back on good economic footing.
Yeah.
And not just economic.
Hold on.
There's other pieces to this too.
Some said not too fast. It's because the question we have to ask, why did China send the premier? You know, the premier,
right?
He's the second in command,
right?
He reports to President Xi,
right?
So what is the optics of it for China to send a premier?
Yeah.
That tells me, did the China, and this is a question for you guys, do you think China forgave?
No.
Australia?
And it's interesting. I definitely want to hear your opinions also. And I want to hear your opinion too, David.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting because, you know, remember the United States. So Taiwan is still a thing, right? Taiwan is still at the very center, right? At the very center of tensions between the US and the West.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the things that, and you guys will see a rebrand of the channel, so be on the lookout for that. But one of the things that is the biggest thing is that economics wins every time.
Course. Yeah.
And so when you're looking at Australia got a large portion of their wealth from China, right? They were selling to China, and that stopped because China was like, nope, you guys have kind of not been, you guys have not been great. We're going to stop.
Yeah.
Okay. Obviously it's an oversimplification of what happened, but you get the picture. Okay. Now, what has the West been doing with Australia? The West has been stockpiling weapons for a platform, more or less, because Australia is much closer to Taiwan than the United States is.
Yeah, of course.
And so if you're playing an interesting game of who has the greater influence, he or she who has the money has more influence than he who does not.
And this case is China, you know. But there's also another dynamics that is taking place, reshaping as we speak right now, reshaping the landscape in that part of the world, which this has to do with the military treaty agreement signed between North Korea and Russia.
That's
with by the way, guys, for you, I'm sure you reach this conclusion, with China behind the scenes, because you cannot, and I'll tell you this, no matter how you look at it, the treaty was signed, or the agreement or alliance, whatever you want to call it, between Russia and China, between Russia and North Korea, but China will always play a role into all this. And this is why, and again, I can conclusively say that it was Australia that is, to me, the way I look at it, economically speaking, maybe, and this is a big maybe Australia is coming to its senses, even though I doubt it. Yeah, I have my doubts.
So you think basically that the West allowed for this to happen, like the West,
the US, I because Australia, here is the hard truth about it.
Yeah,
knowing what I know because of my years in, I mean, we were familiar with the Pine Gap, and to the point that, you know, Aussies national with security clearance couldn't get in certain sections of Pine Gap. That tells me right there who's in charge. The one thing that is a lot of, and I am sure some Aussies know this, might not, decisions regarding Australia in that part of the world are not made in Canberra.
Yeah.
They are made in Washington.
Yeah.
That means including even if Australia will be pushed into a conflict, the decision will be made into Washington. And this is what I'm saying.
Interesting.
Like what you said at the beginning, economics will end up winning over.
Absolutely.
Because the economy of Australia went down.
Oh, huge.
Completely.
Absolutely. Hugely. Yeah. And that's why that was a problem. That's why when China pulled basically, when China was basically like, no, we're not, let me see if I can find a list of the exact things that they pulled. But it was largely minerals basically that they said no to. And then it was also lobster, which has not been reinstated yet. And then beef, a couple of beef suppliers have not been reinstated yet, but it was primarily minerals. Yeah,
well, there is, because one reason is China depends, believe it or not. I use the term depends because I looked at the import of China over the last decade from Australia regarding iron ore.
Yeah.
There is no ifs and buts, guys. It's the hard facts. China depends. Well, it makes sense. Why? Because of the proximity. Geographically, Australia is closer. Yes, China can get the iron ore from Africa. Can get it from maybe Malaysia, Indonesia, whatever, North Korea for that matter. Still, Australia has massive capacity of iron ore. That's one. But the big picture to me is economics. Yeah. Whether, and I'm going to share a picture with you here, guys, for the arrival of Li Qiang. That's here, right here. And this is, look at this picture. Can you tell
let me see
the body language? But not on this one. Sorry, I'm going to take it. I'm going to ask you a question, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Look at Penny Wang. She's right here.
Yeah.
Okay, what can you say about her body language?
She is, so if you were looking at an empress ruling over her constituents, that's what that would be. She is very clearly in charge. You can tell. So she has taken her face and moved it down, but she hasn't moved her entire body. So this person is in control. She has a smirk, which is not a genuine smile necessarily. And she is very clearly in charge.
Which is true. You know why? Because you take her, you take Marles. Marles is their Secretary of Defense. And of course, the incompetent Albo.
Yeah.
All three, those ones that decide. And they decide in conjunction with the US. US will have to dictate the term to them. So this is during the visit. And of course, the protocol and all that stuff. Here is what's important, guys, to understand. The last time a Chinese official visited.
Yeah, it was 7 years.
7 years, that's correct.
7
and it was
years ago.
Li Qiang.
Yeah.
I can't pronounce that name, but that's what it was. I had a picture somewhere of him. So that's when it was. So the idea now, we need to think in terms of, is Australia coming to its senses? What do you guys think?
Well, so here's my next question about this, because we're not in those rooms, right?
That's
sometimes
true.
I wish we were, because we would do a lot better, I think, than some of these people are doing.
Do you know what my wish is?
What?
To attend the upcoming summit of BRICS in October of this year.
Can any of you guys make that
it happen?
Can any of you make it happen for us to attend that summit? Please send an email.
That's really my
to
wish.
show at geopoliticsandconflict.com.
Really,
if you can make that happen, let us know.
Well, the reason my wish for that is because I will be in close proximity to asking officials some questions if they will be willing to answer. So,
and honestly, they could probably use some advice from you. I'm just putting those 2 cents out there. But so I have an interesting question about this because there's the game. It's interesting because there's the game that's played for the world, right? So everything is theater. It's called the political theater for a reason, okay? It's the political or the global theater or the worldwide theater because it is theater, okay? There's the part that everybody sees. There's a part that's in the news. There's a part that, that is for everybody. But then there's the reality of behind the scenes. So if the truth is that Australia can't really do anything without the US, right? Like without the US's permission, unfortunately, more or less, or the Western world's permission, that Australia can't do anything. So I think the fundamental question you're asking is this something that they did without the consent of the US government? Or is this something that they are doing with the consent of the US government? Because I will say this, in the US, the anti-China rhetoric is a very strong talking point. Okay. It's a very big talking point. It's we have to clarify who our enemies are, right?
Yeah.
And the enemies are Russia and China, basically. And interestingly enough, they have been for a really long time. The enemies somehow never change.
Yeah.
But it's Russia and China, okay? So if the US was seen to be boosting its economic ties with China, especially with the Taiwan sticking point, that wouldn't look good. Okay. And especially the right here, the right is very anti-China here.
Yeah.
And so that would look very, very bad, considering the narrative that they want to keep pushing.
Yeah.
So is this a potential like, hey, we can't directly boost our ties with you, but we can send you Australia. So you're still getting boosted economic ties. You're still getting more or less support. It just can't be directly from the US. So we're doing a sideways deal where we're sending you Australia. We're using Australia as a way to boost ties.
Well, if it is the case, that means all those countries that we use in this context are nothing but puppets, and they are. So if the country couldn't decide for itself, how about Australia deciding for itself? Of course they can't.
Yeah,
it's the same argument that's been made about the Philippines. The same argument's been made about Japan and South Korea. The same now in Europe. Speaking about Europe is the idea that if you think about the economic setting that was between Australia and China, I'm gonna go as far as comparing it. This is just for a comparison's sake, comparing it to Germany and Russia.
Yeah.
So what was Germany getting a lot from Russia? Energy.
Yeah, energy.
What is China getting, or used to get a lot from Australia? Iron ore and some other mineral.
Yeah, so, I think it's like timber and other minerals.
There's other products there, but to me, it's the idea of the comparison.
Yeah.
Look what we did to the German, because we don't want them to get closer. Look what we did to Australia with the AUKUS and the submarine deal stuff that is $386 billion, which is Aussies are like shaking their. I have some contacts in Australia. We talk privately, and they kind of like, we have no clue what this government is doing. Well, my answer to them is always, it's not about you, government. The government is just following orders.
Well, then if that's the case, it's a very interesting dynamics. It's a very interesting dynamics.
That's true.
Here, because it isn't just the case. Let me pull up exactly what this says, but it isn't just the case that there is this economic sort of not fully recoupling, but economic recovery or growth together.
The term they use in the Western media, there is a specific term they use in for this. Stabilizing the relationship. Now, anytime you hear the term stabilize, that means, first of all, you acknowledge that there are tensions, and second, stabilize doesn't mean it is fixed.
Right.
So.
But one of the other things that's happening is, Li, when he visited, he promised 2 new pandas to the zoo in Adelaide, Australia.
That's correct.
There's also, I think, a 5-year multiple entry visa, a reciprocal 5-year multi-entry visa for tourism, business, and visiting family members, and that China would include Australia in its visa waiver program.
Oh, so wish we had that here.
Yeah, well, it's too big of a. When a country keeps saying that you're the bad guy, it's hard. It's hard to.
That is true. I understand.
I understand. I mean, I understand what's happening. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand what's happening. But this isn't just an economic stabilization. This is
also political.
It is. It's also political. Pandas for the zoo, right? That is a clear show, right? That's a clear show of here we are interested in they also call it normalizing or stabilizing relations outside of just economics. And I'm very curious about this, and especially the visa waiver program, and especially the 5-year multiple entry visas for tourism. Very interested in that.
But there is also one thing we all need to know about Australia. Australia, historically, I mean, if you look at the history of Australia, how we came to existence, you know, because you all know who the original people in Australia. Australia has always been, at least based on the record that I looked into, believe it or not, has always been paranoid about being attacked, about being, you know,
they're an island. I mean,
I know, but it's still the fact that you are living under that kind of thinking. Oh, I'm gonna be attacked one day. By whom, first of all, and why? So in this case, when you identify or sort of identify an enemy to push the agenda, in this case, China, Australia was sort of convinced, based on what we pushed through or shoved down his throat, that yes, indeed, China is the threat. And since the psychic of the Aussie society, I'm not saying all of them, but majority, the paranoia has always existed. So, and this is why we've been pushing. You know how we sold them the idea of the submarine? Because we knew the paranoia. That's why we sold them that. So China is approaching it differently. China, because it's reflecting its own history, its own culture, its own customs, its own. China is not dumb. China is smart enough to know we still can manage to have a relationship with you with a smile. But that doesn't mean they can make a decision.
Well, that doesn't mean they trust them necessarily.
Well, not necessarily.
There's mutual trust, because I don't think that's the case.
No. In international affairs, there is no such thing as trust. There is the strategic interest. That's what it is. So, but the idea is that the dynamics are changing in that part of the world. I've been talking about it for the last 4 months or so as to what I see over the horizon. And to me, this deal between North Korea and Russia just confirmed that to me. It's a done deal.
Huge.
It's going to change the dynamics. So it becomes, mind you, that even Indonesia now is applied for. I checked that applied for BRICS, but it's not about that. Indonesia want to build a port in Malacca Strait. Very significant when you consider. You know, why is this important? When you consider the economy of Australia versus that of Indonesia.
Right.
Australia understand that Indonesia is a big deal economically in a region. But also you have to understand that ASEAN, who ASEAN trade with the most? China.
Yeah, straight up.
So to Australia, it's kind of thinking, you know what? This might work to our benefit. It's a win-win. To China, it will sort of reduce that kind of anxiety and tensions. To Australia, it can at least be able to ship out some of its products, because businesses in Australia are suffering.
Sure, livid. I'm sure they've been livid this entire time.
Last time I was talking to Barwick.
Robbie.
And Robbie is someone I trust, and his political party is always pushing for the narrative that China is not the enemy. You guys need to get it. And some Aussies are now waking up a little bit to start understand about their political party and so forth. And I was talking to him, and he was like, the economy is not doing well. The banking sector is not doing well. So Australia shot itself in the foot when it embarked on the policy advocated by the United States. The same arguments can be made about Germany. This is what we're seeing.
Well, and that's really ultimately my question here. And I don't have an answer for it, right? Because I think there is, there's obviously the trade restrictions that China hit Australia with, right? And in 2020, that was 20 billion Australian dollars. So that's like 13 billion US. And, that's there is that economic section, right? There is that as a possibility, but I have a really big questions as to why this is happening, really, because it's easy to say, okay, well, it's because of the 20 billion Australian dollars and that compounding over the last 4 years.
4 years.
So that's very possible, but does it show that there's less and less faith in the United States? I mean, if this is Australia acting on its own, does that mean faith in the US's protection of Australia or resources that it sends to Australia? Is that something that is declining? Is Australia acting on its own? If it is acting, as sort of a proxy of Washington, D.C., why is Washington, D.C. allowing this now to happen, right?
Yeah. Well, the same argument can be made about because the Chinese Premier Li Qiang went to New Zealand as well.
Yeah.
Prior to going to, because New Zealand was, you remember when Mahuta was in charge and Blinken asked her for whatever, she said, hell no. But the new person elected at that time, I forgot his name, pivot. He pivoted. So could the Chinese play in the game, the strategic game? Because China always think long term. Well, it's part of the culture.
I definitely. And if you look at where Australia is situated and in that part of the world, Australia and New Zealand are the US's eyes, right, in that region.
Well, that's true. When you consider the Five Eyes, New Zealand is part of that included. And the idea of the whole reason we had the Pine Gap. And interesting enough, it is that it was a conversation at that time about where to put the Pine Gap.
Yeah. And where were they going to put it?
Well, it was just the conversation at that time. Was New Zealand an option?
Okay.
And
they would have had the most beautiful experience ever.
The decision ended up being on Australia. But the one thing that is for sure is this trip could, and I say this is maybe not, but it could change the trajectory vis-a-vis the bilateral relations between Australia and China. Even though I don't fully trust the Australian government to have the capability of making unilateral decisions.
Sure.
This is no different than Germany. This is no different than France, UK, Italy, all the other weak states. To me, they are weak. So, and that's how I see it. And this is why you look at now all of those European countries end up going to China.
Yeah. Well, it
makes you wonder.
It is interesting because we've been talking to a lot of people about the US dollar, right?
Yes.
Because de-dollarization is the hot topic. Okay.
That is true.
The hot topic.
Yeah.
And what role China will play in that is the other hot topic, because if you're looking at the two largest economies, it's the United States and China. Right?
Yeah.
Like even if you look at Russia's economy
Russia
is tiny.
Yeah.
Okay, it's actually super interesting to watch because Russia has a lot of land mass and it has a lot of natural resources, but population wise, it's tiny globally. GDP wise, it's tiny globally. Its economy is so small.
Look at India in reverse. You got massive population, but look where's the economy. Even though you and I know that the numbers New Delhi sort of projects or sort of disclosed are not real. Those numbers are not real. That they're just fact about how India is. But I can see the reverse roles.
But so isn't that so interesting? Because this like big bad guy or whatever is actually a very, very small economy.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the US and China as basically the major players in terms of what ends up happening to the dollar. So it's interesting because now we're watching the dumping of the bonds, right? So China dumped $53 billion worth of bonds.
Yeah, they went down from 1.4 trillion.
Yeah,
to about 700.
Yeah, we're at 780 right now,
somewhere around that.
And so it's been, because even this, they still have about 780-ish billion in bonds still. But you're right. It has declined over the years, right?
Very fast.
So very fast. So well, very fast and very slow, because I think some people think that it's going to happen overnight, right? That this is like an overnight process. It is not. And the dollar is still very strong comparatively. 50-ish, somewhere around 50% of currencies held are still US dollars. 20% are euro. And then only 8% is the Chinese renminbi. And so it's interesting to look at where that's headed.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we are not seeing, and that I was not actually able to find, is what impact does this have? What currencies are being used in this bilateral trade now between China and Australia? Are they using their own? What percentage are dollars? And you'd think logically, well, okay, they just use their own currencies to trade, but that's not necessarily true.
I think I wrote an article a few years ago, and I'm going to see if I can dig it out, way back, in which I disclosed, I titled it, from a reserved to a global currency, about the yuan, and how it will just, and I argued in the article, I'm going to dig it for it later on, guys. I'll post it for you. How I argued back then, this is not about taking over the dollar. It was never about that. I talked to people, I researched, I didn't find the evidence that suggests what the Chinese yuan or what the Chinese government wants. It wants to replace the dollar. They never wanted that, because they saw what happened. There are a lot of complexities that comes with becoming the global reserve currency by which the whole world, the Chinese yuan was added to the basket of currencies in 2016.
Which is very new in terms of a currency. That's new,
but they never had the intentions of, you know what, we want to dethrone the US dollar completely and become, they're never interested in
it's
this.
Also tied to the US dollar. So it would be very hard to,
that is correct,
to crash the US dollar. And still, so, when people talk about that, I do not see there being a will or a desire for anyone to crash the US dollar right now. So many countries have their local currencies actually tied to the US dollar, that would be a catastrophe, including with China. And so but continue, David. Sorry,
well,
you were
I'm
talking
trying,
about
I'm trying to look at this one, if I can find it for the community, so they can read. I have to dig deeper. But my point in all that was that the idea, what I found back then, is that the objective for the Chinese was always to ensure staying away from the dollar. In other words, they don't want to be dependent on the dollar, and that was the reason for that, because their economy. Remember, I'll tell you guys this, for how many years, if you remember, for how many years the Chinese economy was producing at a double digit. I mean, let's face it. So to me, personally, my own analysis was that back in the 2016, when they decided to move forward with putting the currency in the basket of global currencies, they were saying to themselves at that time, and again, this is my own thinking, the Chinese government was saying to itself at that time, you know what? We want to move into this direction, because if we are producing at a double digit on an annual basis, that means our economy is going to overtake that of the United States. However, we never want to have our currency become or replacing the dollar completely, because it comes with issues.
Absolutely, it comes with
look no further
issues.
Where we are. What the Chinese want, or wanted back then and still do, is that they want bilateral and even global trade within to bypass the dollar. That's their objective.
And it does seem that they're interested in acquiring assets or building assets. So they seem to be able to, and I'm not an economist, but this is what it seems like from this side, is that they're able to build up power regardless of whether they have the reserve currency status or not. And I wonder if so much emphasis is being put on reserve currency status. Almost not, and I'm not going to argue that reserve currency isn't critically important. It's very, very important. It's how it's one of the major ways that the United States has gained the power and traction globally that it has.
That
okay.
is true.
But China didn't rise in the same way that the United States rose. The United States rose after World War II with massive amounts of debt. That's how we built that up. And China did it differently. It didn't do it the way that the US did. And so I think it's interesting to observe the way that China has gained its influence, because it is impossible to argue that China doesn't have massive influence, whether it's here in the United States or whether it's in Australia or whether it's globally. China has massive influence, but they didn't do it through having their currency be not only a reserve currency, but be a currency that's widely held. If it's only 8% of the currencies that are held, that's not huge. I mean, compared to some other currencies, sure, but not comparative to the economy that it has.
Well, it's there because of where China's economy was moving forward. Mm-hmm. Of course, they had to experience some slowdown, and given the issues of the real estate markets and all that stuff. But it's still, in comparison to other economies, it's not bad. I mean, as I said, if you only guys remember how many years the Chinese economy was producing at a double digit, and that should give you an idea right there as to where. I did find the link here with all the articles that I used to write for the Huffington Post. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just put the link for everybody, because that's what knowledge is all about. So I'm going to put it on the chat box, guys. Some of the articles go back to 2014.
Wow.
But there's some
10 years ago.
Yeah, some interesting stuff that I wrote about back then that I'm seeing it evolving today. So,
we got a super sticker. Jane Huang.
Oh,
thank you so much for your super sticker.
Turkey, China protocol. Yeah, look at, guys, that
did you
link.
Post it?
I did
post
here
it
is. There. Yeah, so it has everything.
Let me see
there.
If I can pin it. I cannot
so,
pin it. Yeah, guys, David put it in the chat. I can't pin it from here. Sorry. But yes, there it is. What is that, David?
Huffington. I'm gonna send it to you.
Okay. Oh yeah. Send it to me so that I can pin it.
And you can. So.
Well, this is definitely an interesting.
Yeah.
This is an interesting move forward, especially considering Australia's strategic importance, because ultimately, like, it's interesting the sizes of economies, right? Because $20 billion, a $20 billion hit for the United States would be, unfortunately, a drop in the bucket.
That's
right.
True. That's
with
true.
our U.S. debt clock. You know what? I might show the U.S. debt clock on every single episode or every single show. Do we have one? The U.S. debt clock?
Yeah. It's not a laughing matter, because most Americans have no idea what lies ahead financially, and if they only know what will it mean what's going to happen once we default. Most Americans.
You think we're going to default?
I think we need to do a show on that.
I think that would be a great show to do.
What do you guys think?
Let me show this debt clock. But that's interesting. All right, let's see it. The U.S. debt clock. This is usdebtclock.org, guys, if you've never seen it.
Yeah.
But this freaks me out every single time. It's
very, very hard. As I said, most Americans do not understand really what's going on into the financial sector. And this is one of the reasons why we made that decision to really reorient the channel towards the financial aspects of it, because it's very, very important.
Yeah, it is maybe the most important. It's maybe the most important thing.
Well, it's because the decision we're going to be making and how it's going to impact our daily life.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to end it with this, though, because one of the things that Lior said that I actually really appreciated is, here in the United States, there is very much a sense that things are going very badly, and they are. That's absolutely the truth. many other countries have faced hardships before. And if you are dedicated to thriving, if you are dedicated to, obviously taking aside completely war-torn countries. What is
the
it?
Chinese yuan from reserve currency to global currency.
Oh, cool.
I found the article.
Yeah,
And,
send it over. Did you write that? What is that?
Yes, I did write it.
That's awesome.
So
yeah,
I'm gonna send it to you guys, and write this one.
Oh, cool. When was that? Oh, 2020.
Yeah,
okay.
2020.
Love it. Yeah, send that over.
So
send that over.
Let me get it.
And let's see if I can pin it. But that no matter what, no matter how crazy things might get, there are always ways to thrive if you are really looking to do that. If you are willing to take a look at what's going on, accept what's going on, and make better choices for yourself, make good choices for yourself. There are always ways to thrive, even in challenging times, even in challenging economies. In downturns, I think the statistic is that during a downturn, more millionaires are created than at any other time in history.
What just happened 3 years ago?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. That was different. That's a little bit different because the largest wealth transfer in history
happened during that time. You all know what we're referring to, right? You guys are smart enough to know.
That's different. And that is not what I mean. And that is what we are combating. That is what we are fighting against. I want you guys to have that money back. I want that money to go back in your pockets and in our pockets and not theirs. But that no matter what challenging times there are, you can always find ways to thrive.
That's true.
As long as you take responsibility for yourself and make that a priority for yourself. So I want to add it with that. I want to sort of end with that. Do you want to take a question or two?
Questions? Yeah. I want to. If you can pin that article for them, please.
Yes. Let me try.
And we'll take questions, guys, and like 2 or 3. And we'll just go from there.
Okay. Question. Army with Harmony. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay. Question. Does MMT suggest deficits do not matter? It is how the money is spent. Sorry, I'm having trouble reading this.
Yeah, the money spent is what is of concern.
Go ahead. Certainly, yes.
I can answer that one because I do not know much about the MMT, the modern monetary theory. Maybe I have someone in mind we're gonna invite one day.
Yeah.
And she's an economist, and I can't answer that one. I do not know.
So from what I do understand about it, though, there is certainly how the money is spent. So that is the theory, right?
Yeah.
And how the money is spent is a very, very important piece of this. And in the United States, the money is not going back into the people. Let's say the middle class, for example.
Of course.
As the middle class disappears, and not only middle class in terms of how much income is coming in, but middle class in terms of the cost of everything rising to the extent that it is.
Yeah.
And I will say this about that. There are a lot of exposés coming out right now that that's not inflation that's causing the rise in things. So they're price fixing. The FBI, I think, is going after price fixing in some of the largest markets in the United States, because there's the software system that these places were using basically were price fixing rent for apartments. And so that didn't have anything to do with inflation. That didn't have anything to do with the national debt. That didn't have anything to do with anything other than people basically being like, okay, well, we can take as much from them as possible.
Yeah.
The eggs, right? Eggs got ridiculously expensive.
That's true.
They got ridiculously. I don't have to
worry about that because I have 4 eggs.
You have chickens.
I have 4 chickens.
But turns out that actually wasn't. So the price rose because of inflation.
Yeah.
But then they said it was in anticipation of a bird flu that never happened. And so they just rose the price. They kept the prices really high, and it didn't go back down. Even the bird flu didn't happen. So what they were anticipating happening, which is why they rose the prices to begin with, didn't happen. And so then food across the board rose without any real reason because we can blame inflation for it. So we're finding, and these exposés are coming out all over like nonstop right now, that it actually isn't inflation that is causing a lot of these high costs. It is the overreach of large corporations. It is the fact that the American people are not demanding that we figure out why this is happening. Because if you can look at it and say, oh, well, it's inflation's fault, then you don't look at, well, wait, is it? Is it actually, is the $10 carton of eggs, is that actually inflation, or is that something else? So the Biden administration addressed it with a video of President Biden talking about how much air there is in a bag of chips, like versus how much chips there are in a bag of chips. It caused outrage from people, and they were like, "This is the thing you're focusing on," because he didn't directly address it. He was like, well, there's so much air in this bag. You
forgive Biden. He's kind of
that's his debate. His administration did that. He did not do that. Okay.
He's in La La Land, doesn't know. So let me take this from Francis Tango. Dr. O, you believe that? Do you believe that the Chinese money becomes world money? I know, I don't. No, I don't, Francis. And I've always argued that one before, because Chinese weren't after that one. What Chinese were after is that their trade will not be dependent on the US dollar, because they know that what is happening now to Russia could be happening to China. As a matter of fact, there are some sanctions on the Chinese, but the Chinese thought about it ahead of time. But I never bought the argument that was circulating at that time in the West. Remember, when I was in Washington, D.C., we were hearing about this, dealing with it in a way that the monetary aspects, you talk to some financial analysts back inside the government, and well, the Chinese currency wants to take over. I was like, no. They have no interest for that.
If they did, they're doing a bad job.
I said, no, they are not interested. They will not go that way. Even when they surpass the U.S. economy. What they want is that the bilateral trade will be conducted to bypass the dollar. That was the whole objective. And now with what's going on in Europe with the sanctions, paved the way for that. Because now, you know what's coming now? A system that will bypass the SWIFT altogether. This is why North Korea now, it will no longer be where it was, let's say, just 20 years ago. Because now it will have access. North Korea will have access to goods anywhere in the world they want. Whomever wants to trade with, bypassing the SWIFT system. That's
why my position has always been that sanctions are wildly short-sighted. Because even if they work in the short term, so sanctions and tariffs, both things. Because tariffs on goods coming in from China, like that's also its own issue. But my issue with sanctions are not the sanctions themselves. It's the unintended consequences of those sanctions. Because it's like if you bully a kid on the playground, right? There's only so long that they're going to get pushed around before they're like, they're going to go get the other kids and like team up on the person that's been kicking their butt. And that's the way it is. And so you end up with exactly what's happening right now, where people are looking to bypass the SWIFT system, and they're going to do it and not need the US at all. And interestingly enough, if you look at internet cables, because all internet cables in the world actually used to go through the United States. And
do you want to know where the cables are?
There's a map. There's like a map of where all the cables are,
in the Atlantic,
and all over under the ocean, and
but
all
which
of that.
countries in Europe, northern, way up through near Ireland?
Oh, really?
Scotland and all.
There's cables all over the place. There's a really cool looking map.
By the way, FYI, guys, those are an easy target. for the Russians if they ever want to.
They are,
But they
and
won't.
there's
They
even
won't.
articles online and
Yeah,
stuff of like
yeah.
how you like tap into the internet. But so interestingly enough, China has actually put a bunch of cables that bypass the United States entirely, because the United States is the NSA
Well, yeah,
and
well,
stuff.
they
Just
know.
looking at everything,
They
right?
know. Yeah.
And so it's interesting watching other countries strengthen their own economies, more or less. And I think that that's not necessarily just as I'll say this, the governments of the world do not get news. They don't get their information from the news, right?
No,
They don't get their
no.
information
They
from like
feed the
mass
news
media,
to
right?
them.
They feed the news.
Mhm.
They get their information from their own intelligence services, from their own analysts. They
Cables.
They get their own,
yeah,
they get
yeah.
their own information.
Yeah.
They're not reading the same stuff that the rest of us are,
No.
right? But I think that they're strengthening not just as a, intentional thing, but also as a hedge. Every empire has fallen
Yeah.
before this. So would it be ridiculous to think that this one wouldn't?
Will be
Even
exceptional.
Rome
No.
fell.
That is true.
And it's interesting, if you look at the fall of Rome and what is currently happening in the United States, there are some shocking similarities between the two. Guys, look it up. It's very interesting. But I do wonder how much of that is them sort of hedging their own or fortifying their own economies. China bought a ton of gold. Gold purchases have gone through the roof in the last decade or so. How much of that is them protecting their own economies?
Well, that's why a lot of people are moving into that idea. This is why we started to consider this idea of talking about money.
Yep.
It's very, very important to understand. There's a question here from Francis Tango once again.
Yeah.
Question: what do you think about Russia and North Korea a new treaty of helping each other if they are attacked? Sorry, I don't know how to say anything. No worries.
No, you said it great.
You said it fine.
You said it great.
The whole idea is that just to guys give you an idea about what the treaty is all about, and I'm gonna break it down in a simple language, very short. So basically, what was the treaty was all about is that if one country is attacked, either Russia or North Korea, the other country will get in and support that country immediately. There is no waiting period. That's all it is all about. That's what this treaty is all about. But in itself is very significant. This is why you consider the missile technology that the North Koreans have. Do you know that some missiles that Russia used in Ukraine were from North Korea? But also you have to go back in history to understand who provided that technology for North Korea to begin with.
Yeah.
It was the Soviet Union back then. So the same thing for Iran developing its missile technology because of North Korea. Libya because of North Korea. So they do have something that other countries will want. This is why now the dynamics has changed. What makes it very unique in this case is that now, as I said, China is behind the scenes. China didn't need to sign it. Why? Because North Korea is a client of China. As a matter of fact, if it weren't for China, North Korea will cease to exist because it was the lifeline. The lifeline for China.
I hadn't considered that.
A lot of people do not know.
Wow.
To the depth of how much China. And even back then, I remember some conversation in Washington back then. We're talking to the Chinese, trying to convince them, hey, can you reduce your support for North Korea's?
Interesting.
And you know what was the answer from the Chinese?
Clearly no.
No, they didn't say that. They just smiled and said, we'll think about it.
Very diplomatic.
It's because, well, here is a reason.
It's a diplomatic no.
Yeah, but also Chinese understood the role that North Korea would play in case there is tension in that part of the world, which, by the way, the Chinese are anticipating that.
Yeah.
And now it became clear. And that's what I argued 4 months ago about when NATO said, we are going to open an office in Japan, in Tokyo.
Yeah.
I put the two and two together and figured, oh, this is where they come in.
Yeah.
Russia got ahead of it by signing this treaty with them. Why do you think Russians went to Vietnam? Vietnam was a client of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So basically what Russia is doing is realigning its former allies back into. And given one other key that Vietnam has is that Vietnam applied for BRICS. Russia is a member.
Yeah.
It can recommend. Russia cannot dictate the term. No country can dictate. So
I actually love the way you just put that, David, because you called them clients. And that is true.
It is. It's always been.
But that's accurate, right?
Yeah.
It's
because
it's
in
clients,
the world of
right?
Yeah. For the word I've always used since I started getting involved in global affairs, whatever, we looked at countries and all that stuff. I've always used the term client. So
well, because that is probably the way that they're actually talking about it too, right?
That is correct.
It's their clients.
That is correct. So
super
but
interesting.
when you look at
the media doesn't talk about it that way.
They won't say it that way because it will expose the depth of the relationship, and they don't want masses to know. Look at just what US and Germany is saying. What are they saying? Allies.
Allies, right.
And yet we are about, by the way, guys, we are about to sanction German banks. So it's just that's the answer, Francis, is the idea of what that treaty is all about. So.
All right. Do you want to take one more?
One more. Why not? You answer it.
Oh, well, hold on. Let me
take one for economy.
Let me see if I can.
Let me see
if I can find one. Scroll up.
You go up, I go down, and I'll check this one here and see.
Oh, this isn't a question, but I totally agree with this. It's part of the P. Geopolitics affects your daily life, but geopolitics is subservient to geoeconomics, something nobody in the West openly says.
Which is true.
That you right there just said why we are changing the direction of our channel.
Yeah, we decided to do this because we've been thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then plus, remember, there is the other channel. We'll deal with that. Geopolitics is different. Here is different. Here we want to talk about the direction of money, where things are headed forward, so you can at least have an understanding what's need to be done. Now, as far as investments, we will be calling on individuals
experts
with background,
to do that.
not us, because I'm not qualified.
I'm not qualified
and I can't,
to do investments.
You guys, one thing I'm sure you know it by now. If I don't have an answer, I say I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't shy away from saying I don't know everything.
Yeah.
You know, when I don't know, and I can't speculate. I can't assume. I can't just sound intelligent. No, I refuse that. This is where the difference about when you look at YouTube, everybody's geopolitical. Come on, that becomes a problem for me personally, and that's just how I feel about it. This is one of the reasons why you don't see my face on other channel much. I don't go.
Well, although if you guys think that one of us should be on somebody else's show, tell them about it and tell us about it.
You go.
No, you go too. Oh my goodness, David, you have to. Okay, well, thank you guys for joining us. We will be back next week.
Yes, and we'll tackle about some economic or financial issue. We'll talk about.
I want to ask you guys. We want to bring on guests, but not the guests that are doing the regular circuits. Right? Because they're and nothing wrong with those guests. We're going to bring them on too. But I want people who are real experts that may not have the giant reach, but that are really brilliant in whatever area of economics, of oil and gas, of or any energy sector, any financial sector, any global economic sector. Let us know that, because those are the people that the like sort of hidden gems. I'm interested in that.
I have one in mind already.
Okay.
We had him before.
Okay.
Art Berman. I'm gonna reach out to him.
He would. Oh my gosh, such
guys,
a brilliant guy.
Is someone you want to hear from. He's been dealing with the oil industry for decades and decades and decades.
And when he was on our show last, which was I think 2 years ago,
almost 3.
Oh my god, almost 3. He predicted what's happening right now in oil and gas.
Exactly.
Brilliant guy.
I'll reach out to him. So. All right, guys. I hope you find this very informative and interesting, as always. And we look forward to seeing you next time. As always, prepare yourself for the changing world order. Till next time. Bye-bye.